Hey guys, what's up? So let's do a quick recap on the huge update that happened on official server. Before we discuss the hero adjustments, let's start with items and gameplay changes first. First is the sound effect. You will no longer hear the enemy attacking if they are not visible. Previously, this was used to locate where the enemies are in their jungle. Now you need to see them first to hear their attacks. Next is the merge text feature. The extra damage from Demon Hunter Sword and the other attack effects are now merged. You'll no longer see those small numbers popping up when activating attack effects. Next are the item changes. Swift Crossbow is a new item that gives attack speed and extra 40 damage on each basic attack. It's a good early game item for those attack speed heroes. Corrosion Scythe is adjusted to make it faster without relying too much on its stacks. And they added a new feature that deals 80 additional damage on each basic attack. It's a new attack effect, which means Golden Staff can amplify its damage. In exchange, base attack is slightly lowered. Golden Staff now has a new feature where each time the unique passive is activated, the user can exceed the maximum speed limit. From 300, it becomes 500%. Feather of Heaven now has a new unique passive where it gives attack speed for each basic attack and it can stack 5 times. It's like the magic version of Corrosion Scythe. They changed the activation of the unique passive of the items Glowing Wand and Genius Wand. Both are now activated when dealing magic damage. That also means Glowing Wand on Xborg is useless. Dominant Size cooldown reduction is removed, but in exchange, they adjusted its attack speed reduction. Instead of removing flat 0.3 attack speed, it now reduces by 25%. It's now percentage based, which means it's more effective against super high attack speed heroes. Brute Force Breastplate now has 10% cooldown reduction. But in exchange, they nerfed its defense stats. With the adjustment on Dominant Size and Brute Force, I think this is a big nerf for tank users. Clock of Destiny now has higher HP, mana, and stacks. If you're a clock user, this is a big buff for you. And they also improved its combo item, Lightning Truncheon. It now has higher damage and more mana. The Spell Flicker is made to work with charging skills. It means you can combine it with other skills to extend the range. Examples are Guinevere's second skill,
Everyone has their own aura.
Yuzong's third skill, and Terizla's ultimate. Now we move on to the hero adjustments. First is Natan. He is now better with magic build instead of physical because of the following changes. Basic attack and first skill scales better with magic power, and he can now gain magic penetration directly. That means Malefic Roar is useless on him since his damage is magic. And they also made changes to his ultimate clone. It now gains 70% attack effects on its basic attacks, and that means the clone can activate the extra damage from Demon Hunter, Corrosion Scythe, and Feather of Heaven. Next is Clint. The range of his ultimate is now almost the same as his enhanced basic attack. It's now easier to do combos from a distance, but in exchange, the base damage of his passive is lowered by 50 points. Next is the buff on Layla. Her first skill can now increase the range of her second skill. This means you can maintain your distance when casting both skills. And the cooldown of her first skill is shortened by 2 seconds in the late game. To balance, they had to lower her late game passive damage by 5%. Next is the buff on Moskov. The range of his basic attack and second skill is now the same. You no longer have to go near the enemy to cast the skill. And they also added attack effects on his passive. This means the extra damage from items like Demon Hunter Sword can now reach the enemies at the back. Next is the nerf on Wanwan. The stun from her first skill is replaced with Immobilize, and it now has a longer cooldown. The attack effect on her ultimate is lowered, as well as its maximum chase range. And they also weakened the damage of her passive skill by 2%. Next is the buff on Karrie. They lowered the cooldown of her second skill by half a second and her ultimate by 5 seconds. The developer said it's a way to give her more room for errors. Is it just me or am I seeing too many Karrie users lately? Next is the buff on Popol and Kupa. Actually, it's for Kupa only, and he now deals more damage to jungle creeps. Has anyone tried Jungler Popol? Next is the buff on Miya. Her Moonlight Shadows can now trigger 30% of attack effects. Maybe you should try her with DHS, Golden Staff, and Corrosion Scythe. Next is the buff on Brody. The damage growth of his basic attack is increased by 10 points. That's an additional 140 damage at max level. Next is the nerf on Beatrix. The developer said her pushing capability was stronger than other marksmen, so they adjusted her damage. Her ultimate will have weaker damage against minions, and her basic attacks will have lower damage on towers. The only buff she got is the shorter cooldown when swapping weapons, and it's a game-breaking 0.1 second adjustment. At least her damage are still the same on heroes. Next is the adjustment on Sun-shin. His base damage is lowered by 5 points, but in exchange, they improved his passive damage in the early game. And he also has a new effect when switching weapons. He now gains movement speed when activating the first enhanced basic attack. Next is the adjustment on Claude. They had to tone down Dexter's damage because of the new item effects. They also lowered the attack effect percentage on his ultimate. Next is the nerf on Kimmy. Glowing Wand was working too well on Kimmy, so they had to adjust her damage. The scaling of her basic attack is slightly lowered, and a minus 5 points of base damage on her first skill. Next is the revamped Hanabi, and she's now available to use. I checked different ML communities, and their reactions are still mixed. Some like it, while some don't. What about you? Next is the nerf on Fanny. The developer said they'll reduce her early game power, lower base damage on her first skill, HP is lowered by 100 points, and weaker damage increase from her passive skill. Next is the adjustment on Sun. The new items made him too strong, so they slightly nerfed his damage. The attack effects of his clones is now halved, and they lowered the damage on his third skill. Next is the nerf on Leomord. He is getting too popular, so a bit of adjustment is needed. Lower base defense when he is under ultimate form, and the ultimate cooldown will now start after the skill ends. They also increased the cooldown of his second skill. Next is the buff on Alucard. His first skill now has a much shorter cooldown of 1 second on all levels. Next is the buff on Thamuz. His first skill can now be affected by cooldown reduction. That means you can now spam his skill more often. Next is the buff on Gloo. The developer shifted his damage towards his first skill, so they are making the following adjustments. Casting range of his first skill is slightly reduced, but the trigger range of Goose are now bigger. The exploding Goo will now scale with his maximum HP. This means more HP will mean more damage for his first skill. And upon explosion, he will restore 3% of his maximum HP. To balance, they had to adjust his other skills. Second skill now has a lower base damage, and his ultimate will no longer reset the cooldown of his first and second skill. HP regen is also lowered when in split form. If you're looking for an underrated XP laner, Gloo might be your guy. Next is Silvanna. Her second skill now counts as basic attack, and they also gained 45% attack effects. This means you can deal extra damage if you equip Demon Hunter Sword or other items with attack effects. Her ultimate now has a faster casting animation, but in return, they had to increase its cooldown by 6 seconds. Next is the nerf on Valentina. The terrified duration is now longer, but a target can only be terrified again after 4 seconds. They also nerfed the range when stealing ultimates. Next is the nerf on Joy. Lower base shield on her passive and longer cooldown for her second skill. I think this one is just fair. Next is the nerf on Carmilla. Longer cooldown and weaker slow effect for her ultimate. The developer said she must rely more on her teammates to keep the enemies inside her ultimate. Next is the buff on Xavier. They removed the damage increasing feature of his passive skill and replaced it with a short movement burst. To maintain his damage, they adjusted all of his skills. This means he is now more mobile with a new passive, and he doesn't have to rely on stacks to deal full damage. Next is the buff on Minotaur. They increase the reach points when dealing damage to heroes. And his ultimate charge will now give more reach. Next is the adjustment on Zhask. His spawn can now trigger attack effects, and because of this, they had to adjust his first skill to benefit more from the new items. Last is the nerf on Mathilda. They lowered the base damage of her first skill in the early game. And second skill now has a shorter cooldown and fewer shield. But in exchange, her first skill will now prioritize the marked target of her ultimate. So almost half the update is for Marksman and their items. The HS build is quite good right now, but let's not forget the burst type build of COD and lightning Truncheon. Unfortunately, tanks will have to suffer with those new high damage items. So have you tried the new item effects? Which heroes are overpowered with the update? Share it in the comment section. That's all for this video. Stay safe and thank you for watching.